Hello, welcome to another video. This is going to be a review for the manga series. It's completed for The Girl from the Other Side. The editions that I have, these are the deluxe editions, which each one, I believe, contains like 3 volumes. There are a total of 11 volumes for this manga. These are beautiful, these are gorgeous, and it includes extra art that I love and adore. So I learned about this manga thanks to Elliot Brooks's channel. This is a dark fantasy gothic mystery manga. I'm gonna try and just kind of go over the basics, the non-spoilery parts, and then I will go over a breakdown of the story, so full spoilers. This manga series is set in a medieval-like world that is split between inside, where humans live and they're safe, and then there's the outside, in which there is this curse that everyone is afraid of that they may catch and will turn them into monsters or these dark creatures. The overall plot of this story is you're following a 6-year-old girl called Shiva who finds herself on the outside and is found by one of these dark creatures who somehow has retained some of his humanity, and Shiva calls him Teacher. He doesn't actually remember his name, barely remembers what his life was. That's kind of just who you're following. And something important to know is Shiva was abandoned out on the outside by her aunt because the slightest even suspicion that someone could be carrying this curse, I mean, it's kind of like a virus. Think about it like that. Like, you know, when there was COVID, like if you had COVID, you had to fucking stay away. It's kind of the same thing, except they will execute people if they believe you even might slightly have a chance of having the curse. So Teacher and Shiva, they live together on the outside in a cute little cottage, and a lot of what this manga is kind of like those mundane life things that you do, just the finding food, cooking, cleaning, walking around, and also meeting some of the other outsiders, the dark creatures. And there's this general sense that Shiva is this pure soul. She's a child, she's kind, and she brings joy, but Teacher cannot touch her, and she is extremely touch deprived. It's pretty sad. It's kind of like that painfully beautiful story. Okay, so spoiler side of the review. So the story starts off with Shiva being found on the outside by Teacher. So you're wondering, why is she out there? Well, she was abandoned by her aunt. Why was she abandoned by her aunt? You learn that her aunt and her are not actually related. The aunt found Shiva already on the outside as a baby. So her aunt just figured that her parents were taken by the curse and she was just out there, but she was a baby. And so her aunt was like, it's fine, you know, it's not like she could be cursed, and she was careful at first, but Shiva never showed any signs of carrying the curse, so her aunt figured it's fine. Unfortunately, when there is a suspicion of there being a curse outbreak, the aunt knows that Shiva was on the outside, and because she's not technically her niece, she can't really take her with her, and so she abandons Shiva on the outside. Also, her aunt was constantly kind of battling this fear of, does this little girl have the curse? So then Shiva meets Teacher. Teacher has somehow maintained a lot of his humanity, and yeah, he wants to protect Shiva. So when they are on the outside, they meet other dark children who, they're very cryptic. It was very hard for me to understand, but basically they plant this idea that Teacher is a strange child. They call him the strange one, and Shiva is actually more like them than the strange child is, which is confusing because so Teacher is like, but I actually look like you guys, and you're telling me that this little girl, this human child, is somehow just like one of you. And the difference between those dark children and Teacher is that the dark children were made by the, what do they call her? The earthly mother. So to explain the earthly mother thing, this is going into the lore of how the curse came to be. And this is very summarized. It's a lot better to read the books to really understand it. But basically, the understanding is that there were two gods. There was a light god and a dark god. And this is how it's at first presented. And they had, an argument, and the light god decided to punish the dark god. And so the dark god was forced into some kind of imprisonment. And in order to get revenge, the dark god created the curse so that it would kind of just spread around, and all of these creatures of light, humans, would now be cursed by darkness. The more explained portion around the end is that it's more like a lover's quarrel. So the light god is a man and represents light and the soul, I believe. I think that the light god represents the soul, and then the dark god, which is actually the earthly mother, she represents the body. I think it's a little cryptic, and it'll make sense later, but the point is that the mother is kind of trapped, and she creates the dark children from herself. She uses her own body to create these dark children, so they're not actually humans contaminated by the curse. They are simply the ones that accidentally spread the curse, because the dark mother wants them to collect human souls and bring them to her. The problem is that if they touch a person, their darkness begins to curse humans, and as they try to make their way to the earthly mother, their body rots, and then finally their soul rots, and they don't make it to her, and they turn into trees. So it's kind of this eternal cycle of mother trying to gain the soul, but unable to, because you can't make it there. And then the light father or whatever trying to gain a body, but never being able to obtain a body because there is no pure enough body for him. Something like that.
I want to make a correction here. I think he can't get a body because the dark children are technically what he needs as a body, because it's part of the earthly mother, but the humans constantly shun away from the dark children.
It's a little complicated. Anyways, so how does Shiva and the teacher tie into this? Well, Shiva is chased by the humans, the ones that are on the inside, because they see her and they're like, oh, she's not affected by the curse. That means she is a pure soul. So there's this prophecy that was said that if they find the girl with the pure soul and they give her to the light father, then it'll cure this curse. So there are a few attempts to try and capture her. It's really horrifying how much trauma this little girl goes through, where the teacher is just constantly trying to protect her. These soldiers, they take her forcibly. So she's taken once and brought back with her aunt, and her aunt gets affected by the curse somehow, and Shiva just wakes up to her aunt being a monster in the kitchen. That's just horrifying. This little girl goes through so much shit. So anyways, curse outbreak once again. So they have to run. They go back to the outside. They find teacher, and the aunt and teacher, they stick together, and the aunt suspects that teacher has ulterior motives. Like, she doesn't really trust him, which is interesting because even I was like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Like, there was an accusation about how he's using Shiva for his own ends, and even he starts to doubt himself, where he's like, am I really being selfish? Like, is it just because I don't want to be alone? And there's just some of these deep pondering moments of, well, when you're really alone, like, yeah, you will kind of convince yourself that you need people just because they're the only ones available. But anyways, Shiva ends up telling them, I don't want you to fight, we have to get along. And this is where you find out that the curse takes a toll. As much as when humans are turned into these dark children, they cannot be killed by weapons, they do slowly rot. So Shiva, her aunt, slowly starts to forget things. She forgets who she is. She forgets who Shiva is. She forgets all this stuff. And it's really heartbreaking because they spend so much time having these little moments together where her aunt is trying to teach teacher how to make a pie. And it's really cute. But her aunt turns into a tree because that is ultimately what happens. And they don't turn into like trees with pretty leaves. No, they turn into just dead trees. It's not pretty. So that's where they learn learn that that is what happens to people who are cursed. And Teacher starts to wonder why that never happened to him, because he's been a dark child for like 6 years. Then more soldiers come to try and grab Shiva, and Shiva and Teacher, they have to leave the cottage that they've been staying in to go further away, and they end up having to make a new home. And there's all this, really sad, because Shiva just lost her aunt, and she just found out that they could turn into trees, and now she's worried that Teacher could turn into a tree, and Teacher has not been touching her because he thinks that she'll catch the curse, but now they're finally just holding hands. It has its beautiful moments. So new soldiers come around to grab her. These soldiers have been infected by the curse, but they still have maintained enough of their consciousness to know that they need to grab the girl and take her. Unfortunately, they also turn into trees. That shit was gruesome. That's when Shiva really did see one guy turn into a tree in front of her. And Teacher loses a foot, and it doesn't grow back. It doesn't hurt or anything, but he lost a foot. Teacher begins to understand this whole thing about the soul and the body, and he notices that Shiva is starting to present with the curse. She has this like black blob thing that is growing on her chest. Earthly Mother's dark children, the original ones, they tell him, they say, well, theoretically you could potentially stave off the curse by providing her with another soul to kind of fight off the curse. And he realizes that he has a bit of his soul left. It's not rotted away completely yet, so he gives Shiva the rest of that soul. The consequence is that he forgets who he is completely. He forgets everything. And so soldiers come, they take Shiva, and he does nothing to stop it because he doesn't feel anything anymore. He doesn't remember who she is. So she gets taken to the castle. Then to the castle, that's where we learn about the sacrifice or whatever. They're gonna kill her. She gets put on an altar the first time, and the king that's about to stab her, he gets like a little heart problem. A lot of stuff happens there. She doesn't get sacrificed the first time. They try to put her on the altar the second time, and the king saves her because the king realizes that their entire sacrifice for the soul means nothing, because the light father, whatever, the god of light, doesn't need a soul. He needs a body, but he can't get a body. I don't know. It's really weird. It's strange. It's like having belief simply for the need to believe that something will fix it, but nothing will. There is no cure for the curse. So Shiva goes back and she finds Teacher, and this is where it got really fucked up. This is where she finds him, and she knows he doesn't really remember, but she says, well, you gave me your soul, but I'm just gonna give it back. So she gives his soul back, and then she turns into a dark child. But what we learn is that Shiva was never human. Shiva was never a little girl. The reason that she came from the outside is because she is actually one of the original Earthly Mother's dark children. And what happened was that the doctor, Teacher, who was actually a man named Albert, he wasn't cursed. He got shot on suspicion of being cursed and was thrown to the outside, and dark child Shiva found him and took his soul, or was going to take his soul, because that's her mission, is to take souls and bring them back to Earthly Mother. But he wasn't quite dead yet, and he just said, like, help me. And so what she did is she took part of her head. So this is why some people have said, like, why does his head look so weird? Like, it's not a fully formed skull. It's because it's the top of the skull. And then she took his soul. So basically, she made an exchange. She gave him body and she took soul. And so she became Shiva because she now had a soul, and Albert became a dark child who could still maintain part of his soul because she didn't take all of it. She gave part of herself and took part of him, and it just created balance. Now, it is alluded to that it's probably not a permanent situation, that he'll probably eventually turn into a tree and she'll probably eventually rot the soul that's within her, but it's still beautiful in a way of, you have to find balance in order to be happy or in order to live together. So yeah, so it ends with that panel. And I do just want to share what I found someone else wrote. I think it was like on Reddit. I'm not gonna read all of it. I'll link it down below probably if anyone's curious. It is very long, but it was very well explained. So, however, the key thing that both worlds share is heart and a genuine form of love. It's why the black child saved Albert from death to begin with. when it says the Black Child, it means the Shiva Dark Child, or I guess they're called Black Child, despite it not being in line with the Black Child's mission. This one quintessential element is what leads to the last panel. Albert and Shiva are both talking about memories, both hold onto a garland. They're both here right now, and the ultimatum of the Black Child getting the soul, or Albert keeping the soul and being alone in his last moments and the memories, is completely rejected. Instead, genuine love between two beings has the two share the soul in perfect harmony, laying in the grass and mutually being able to express themselves in their purest selves, memories, physical form, everything, all thanks to love. So yes, the general vibe of the story is that it's really just about caring for one another. And I really, really do like that it wasn't a romance story. It was more of like a found father-daughter relationship, and just adorable. So this was an amazing manga. I really, really loved it. All in all, I gave the entire series 5 stars because of how much it made me feel, and the extra art in these volumes, totally worth it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you didn't, that is your prerogative, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!